Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aussie ATPLs. Today we'll be diving into CASA ATPL flight planning. In today's lesson we'll be taking a look at regular flight plans. So we'll go through the working process and any traps or tricks to watch out for along the way, as well as a few time-saving tips and some extra bonus stuff at the end. Before we get into it, if you're currently studying ATPL flight planning or any ATPL exam and are looking for some extra support, I've created a free Aussie ATPLs community where you'll get access to free practice exams, revision material and discussions with other students. Private one-on-one tutoring is available, although numbers are extremely limited. If any of that interests you, the links are in the description below, so join the community today. In this video we'll be walking through a standard flight planning question. This is the base of all your questions in the entire flight planning exam. The route that we're given is Alice Springs to Darwin via Alpha 461. We're given a max schedule of 0.79, flight level 310, brake release weight at Alice Springs of 80,000 kilos. Now we're also given some weather conditions. Alice Springs is suitable and Darwin is acceptable, becoming suitable with holding fuel for an inter. Our task is to find the block time and block fuel for normal operations from Alice Springs to Darwin, and a bonus question of how much fuel is required at startup at Alice Springs to get us all the way to Darwin. So if you're a fair way through your studies, you can take a photo of this or pause it and finish the question on your own, then go through the working with us and see how you did. If you're still starting out or you're not sure, you can work through the question with us and see how you go along the way and get all the little time-saving tips that I have to give you. Now if you head to your Urk-Hai 2 chart, we'll find the route Alice Springs to Darwin highlighted here. Take note of the total distances and the average track and magnetic variation for climb, cruise and descent. If you write these down now, you'll save yourself going back and forth to the map every time you need any more or any extra information. So we've got a total distance of 701 nautical miles. Climb data, we've got a track there and magnetic variation. Cruise, we get our track and magnetic variation, and descent, we grab our track and magnetic variation. This will be very helpful when we're doing the calculations, so we don't have to go back to the map and check to see what our track or magnetic variation is to find our head or tailwind components. So now we'll go and check out how we're going to set out our working out for a question like this. So this is how I suggest laying out a question, regular flight plan just like this one. So we've got our departure on the left, flies all the way across to our destination on the right. We've got our total distance of 710 nautical miles, but this is just helps you get a visual representation of the flight path and helps you stay on track along the way. Now how I like to do a regular flight plan is I start at the end. I start with the descent and then I come back to the climb, and then those two distances will help me get the distance in cruise. So we'll finish it off with the cruise calculations. Now to get our landing data, we have to have a landing weight. So to get a rough landing weight here, as the route is reasonably short and we're taking off quite heavy, you can safely presume we'll be using the landing data for 70,000 kilos. However, if you're unsure, you can use rough fuel figures. These are specific air ranges that I use for all my questions, either normal and abnormal ops. So for today's example, we'll be using 9.5 kilograms per air nautical mile, as we're using Mach 0.79, but feel free to take a photo of this and use it for all your flight planning. This is regardless of weight. It just gives you one number for each operation. It makes it very simple and it helps you get your estimates quickly and easily. So continuing on to try and find our estimated landing weight, we're assuming it's 70,000 kilos already, but we'll go through the process just for sake of making sure we know exactly we got the right one. So we take our distance, times it by our specific air range of 9.5 kilos per air nautical mile, and then we just add on an additional 1,500 kilos of fuel. This adjusts for the climb, as you burn a lot more fuel in the climb than you do the cruise or the descent, and that'll give us 8,159 kilos. So if we take that away from our brakes release weight, we get an estimated landing weight of 71,841 kilos, which we're just rounding to 71,000 as we assumed. And the data that you can find from flight level 310 to descend down to our destination airport at 70,000 kilos, which can be found on page 4-3 of the 727 handbook. Make sure you're always using the table on the top right hand side, as that's the only one you'll use in the exam. So definitely highlight this one, as that's all you'll be needing for your exam. Once you extract the data, you should have 107 nautical miles, 660 kilos and 21 minutes. Using the data we found previously, we must adjust this for our wind. So make sure you're using whichever level is half the way down the descent and round to the nearest route sector wind temperature level. So we're rounding to flight level 185 for this one, and we've got a little extract here of what the data was in the question. So this should give you a tailwind of 29 knots. So we need to find how much this 29 knots will affect us over our 21-minute descent. So 29 divided by 60 times 21, and we get a 10 nautical mile adjustment. We also need to make sure we adjust for 400 kilos of approach and maneuver fuel, which you'll need for all your flight plans, unless it explicitly says a straight-in approach, in which case you do not need the 400 kilos. But since it didn't say that, we have to adjust for the 400 kilos of approach and maneuver fuel, and that'll give us final descent data of 117 nautical miles, 1,060 kilos, and the descent will be completed in 21 minutes. So if we head back to our planning page now, we have a descent distance of 117 nautical miles. We can jot down our fuel of 1,060 kilos and our time of 21 minutes. So I like to just keep these around, as we will need to know the total fuel and the total time for our answer at the end of the question. So next we'll head over to the other side of the flight plan, and we'll take a look at our climb calculation. So for our climb data, we require the brakes release weight, which we've already found, flight level, ISA deviation, and the wind component. So brakes release weight here is 80,000 kilos. This is what we're given in the question. We have a climb data that we found earlier with our track and magnetic variation. Now for the route sector wind temperature, you use whichever level is closest to 2/3 the way up the climb. So since we're climbing to flight level 310, we're very close to flight level 235 and flight level 185 on the route sector wind temperature graph. However, we're just a little bit closer to 185, so that's what we'll be using. There's no need to interpolate between them, we just pick this one and that's all we need. So using your whiz wheel, you should find a tailwind of 28 knots, and since we have an ISA deviation of -5 degrees, and the handbook doesn't have any data for negative ISA climbs, we will just simply use the ISA, the climb data in ISA conditions. So if you head to page 2-8 of the handbook for ISA climb data, this will give us a climb of 21 minutes, where we burn 2,850 kilos, and it will take us a total distance of 126 nautical miles. Now we must adjust this for our wind, so since we have a 28 knot tailwind, divided by 60 times that by 21 will give us a 10 nautical mile adjustment again. So if we adjust our distance, increase the distance by 10 nautical miles as it's a tailwind, we get a final descent of 1,136 nautical miles, 2,850 kilos, and it will take us 21 minutes to get there. Now a little bit onto our cruise, we'll need to find the top of climb gross weight, which we can do now that we have our fuel burn in the climb. So we take our brakes release weight of 80,000, take away our fuel burn in the climb, and they'll give us a top of climb gross weight of 77,150 kilos. So back to our planning page, we can enter a climb distance of 136 nautical miles. We've already entered our fuel burned in climb of 2,850 kilos and our time in the climb of 21 minutes. So next we have to do our cruise. Now, since we have our distance in the climb and the descent, we can find the distance in the cruise. If we take our total distance minus the distance in the descent and the distance in the climb, we're left with 448 nautical miles left over. Now that's our total cruise distance. So the first step with all cruise segments is to find our wind component and ISO deviation. So we'll pick the route sector wind temperature level that is closest to our cruise level of flight level 310, which will be flight level 300. We've got a little extract of it here from the question. Now using our cruise data we found earlier, we'll get an ISO deviation of -3 degrees and a headwind component of 44 knots. Now be aware we do have a crosswind component of 45 knots, although this will not be sufficient to exceed the 6 knots or 6 degrees that is required by CASA before we need to adjust for ETAS. If it was 65 knots of crosswind, then we'd most likely need to adjust for ETAS, which I'll show you in a later video. Now to find the TAS, you can either use your whiz wheel, or I prefer the speed of sound formula as it's a bit faster and more accurate compared to a whiz wheel, which can be up to 4 or 5 knots off, just based on manufacturing differences. So if you're interested in how the speed of sound formula works, you can join the community below. There's lots of information in there on it. But you should find yourself a TAS of 459 knots. Now take away our headwind component of 44 knots, you'll be left with the ground speed of 415 knots. Now to find our time in the cruise, we take our distance divided by our ground speed, and that'll give us a time of 1.0787 hours. Make sure to keep these decimal points in there, very important. Otherwise you can lose whole minutes if you don't go. I like to go to 4 decimal points for our hours in this case, because when you times them by 60, we get 64.7 minutes. So now that we've figured out how much time it will take us to travel our cruise segment, we must find how much fuel we're going to use in the cruise segment. To do that, we get back to our specific air range, 9.5 kilos per air nautical mile. We take 44, times it by 0.02, that's our wind there, and since it's a headwind, we add it on to 9.5, and that gives us 10.38, and that's kilos per ground nautical mile. So we then times that by our total distance in the cruise, 448, divide that by 2 as we're looking for our mid-zone weight. We only need half of the fuel burn, will give us around 2,300. We take that away from our start of a cruise gross weight or top of climb gross weight, which is the same thing. Take half the fuel burn away, and that'll give us an estimated mid-zone weight, which we'll simply round to 75 tons. So if we head to our Boeing 727 handbook, find the page with Mach at 0.79 and flight level 310, and you interpolate between 74 and 76 tons to get our 75 tons that we require to do that. So we've got 1,470 kilos per hour and 1,439 kilos per hour. Add those together, divided by 2 and times by 3, and that'll give us our fuel burn per hour at 75 tons. We then divide that by 1.01 to adjust for our decrease of 1% for our -3 degrees of ISA, and then I'll give us a fuel burn per hour times our fuel burn per hour by our hours that we're going to be in the cruise, which we just previously found, and that'll give us a total fuel burn in the cruise of 4,660 kilos. So now that we've found our total times and total fuel burns for climb, cruise and descent, we can add those all together, and they'll give us a total flight fuel of 8,570 kilos and a total flight time of 107 minutes. So before we get carried away, our question asked us for block time and block fuel. This is only flight time and flight fuel, so to convert it to block time and block fuel, we'll go into that in just a second, but always make sure you read the question, RTFQ, otherwise you could get left with the wrong answer when it's a very simple mistake and very easy fix to get the points that you needed possibly to pass your exam. So the difference between a block time or block fuel and flight time or flight fuel is rather simple. Block is from on blocks at the departure point to on blocks at the destination, where flight is from brakes release until you land at the destination. The difference between obviously being start up, taxi out, taxi back, and then shutting down. So if you head to page 1-11 of the handbook to the standard flight times for taxi, you can see those here. So we've got engine start to taxi is 2 minutes, taxi to brakes release is 4 minutes, taxi in and shutdown is also 4 minutes, which gives us a total of 10 minutes of additional time to account for block time over flight time. That'll give us a total block time of 117 minutes. Now for flight time, or flight fuel, you head to page 1-17 of the handbook, and you can find the block allowances here. For start and taxi is 150 kilos. For taxi and shutdown is 100 kilos, totaling 250 kilos. So you simply add 250 kilos to your flight fuel to get block fuel, which will give us 8,820 kilos. So now we'll take a look at our bonus question, which was to find the total fuel required at startup. So to do that, we just need the fuel policy, which is found on page 1-17 of the 727 handbook. I've got it here, and you just entered in all the details. So we have our flight fuel, which we found before. Final reserve, since we're pre-flight, it's 3,300. Weather holding 4,000 kilos per hour. We've got an inter, so we'll take 2,000 kilos of holding fuel for the inter. We've got our startup, taxi and shutdown fuel, as well as our 10% variable reserve. Now we don't need any work in progress or traffic fuel, as that wasn't mentioned in the question, and that'll give us a total fuel figure of 14,977 kilos required at startup to complete our flight. So at the start of the video I promised you a simple trick that you can use if you're running out of time and you want to find a fuel figure for your flight rather quickly. Only use this if you've got about 5 minutes left and like 4 questions remaining or something like that, as it can be rather inaccurate depending on the question and the winds that you'll be facing. So we've got our specific air range that we had before of 9.5 kilos per hour. We just need to adjust it for our wind, so we'll take the total wind. So we've got our cruise wind and descent and climb. The difference is about 16 knots of headwind. So adjust our specific air range for our headwind, gives us 9.82 kilos per ground nautical mile, which just is an estimate, and times that by our total distance, and then add an additional 1,500 kilos just to get a rough flight fuel, which gives us 8,383 kilos as our estimated flight fuel. Our exact flight fuel was obviously 8,570, which gives us a difference of 187 kilos, which for a type-in question won't even be close to enough, or close enough to the answer, but for a multiple choice question, depending on the answers that you're given, you might get the right answer with this one. I've seen ones where you're within 20 or 30 kilos using this system, so only use it if you really need it at the end of your exam, but it's just a nice thing you can use if you have to. That's the end of today's video though. If you're after any extra exam prep, however,